working to combat forced labor. And for over a decade, we've been really pushing the agenda of responsible recruitment. And we have made normative progress. But in terms of practical implementation and actual changes for workers, there is still a lot to be done. And so the premise of the partnership is really that one of the root causes or one of the issues that is preventing that implementation is lack of visibility of data. Basically, the premise that different actors hold different pieces of the string or different strings, see different parts of the information and have access to different data, but no one is really looking at the full picture in terms of data. And so through a data mesh, which I'm sure David's going to explain, the Global Data Partnership aims to give more visibility to the actors that actually have the power and the ability to change and influence the ecosystem. And those are the actors in the ecosystem, so buyers, suppliers, recruiters, companies, and those working directly with workers. So having said all that, what we're going to talk about today is where we are now, 1 year into the partnership. And I know David just came back from Thailand. The first sort of use case of the Global Data Partnership is focusing on recruitment. And the test case is Thailand. So David will be able to talk a little bit more about where we are, where we need to be, what progress has been made, what kind of data we have access to now. David leads on civil society engagement and responsible governance at the World Economic Forum and has literally just arrived from Thailand. Thank you for being here, David. So over to you. We have to be very strict with time. Hopefully we have time for questions at the end as well. So over to you.
Thank you so much, Julia. And I know many of us obviously on the panel are part of the partnership, so I think folks can fill in the gaps if I miss anything. But just, it's really a pleasure to be here with all of you in Kuala Lumpur. Julia already mentioned I work at the World Economic Forum on the team at the forum that focuses on engagement of civil society globally, as well as multi-stakeholder initiatives on responsible business conduct. Probably it was January 2025 where we launched in collaboration with Hewlett-Packard Enterprise and a number of partners, the Global Data Partnership Against Forced Labor, as a multi-stakeholder initiative to move from data fragmentation towards more cooperation, action, and accountability in the fight against forced labor. Concretely, what does that mean? It means that the partnership is developing an open source federated data mesh that allows for interoperable collaboration and the triangulation of actionable signals across data sets while maintaining data sovereignty and control with those who are participating. In a nutshell, you keep and hold the data in your own platform. You retain all ownership of it. And we've created a mesh that will allow essentially that data to talk to one another and to be able to derive insights across the mesh. And so Julia mentioned I just arrived from Bangkok after a week of meetings with the Thai government, civil society, technical partners, and other stakeholders around use case 1, around responsible recruitment. Maybe 4 main reflections that came from a lot of those conversations. One around the fact that technical feasibility is of course exciting. It's exciting to see something that folks have talked about for a long time. What if we could see all the sides of the elephant? And then people could actually take and be motivated to take action on what we see. And so while that's exciting, the essential question still remains around what's the comparative value to the status quo and the comparative advantage for different stakeholders. So essentially, the mesh needs to provide actionable value, not just an academic experiment of what could be possible if we brought signals together, but actually designed to be beneficial in practice for the current work that worker organizations and NGO program managers are doing on the ground, for corporate human rights due diligence officers, for government ministries looking to make sense of what's happening within their domain, et cetera. So not just any insights, but insights that are actionable that we can use in the fight against forced labor. On the recruitment pilot case, also one of the priorities is to make sure that we're bringing in a diversity stakeholders into the design of the process, not just because of the data sets that they hold. And as part of the first cohort, we have, of course, folks with access to audits, access to data related to grievance mechanisms, and a range of different data sets. So it's not just around the data that they hold, but they are shaping what it means to be meaningfully actionable in Thailand itself. So really practically, right? So they need to be part of the co-design of not just we're going to pull insights together, but what does it mean for this to be actionable in Thailand, and how do we move that forward in the current state of that conversation? And of course, we're building on the current existing practitioner networks and communities that have continued to operate even now with limited capacity. Secondly, and I'll keep going so we have more time for questions. The work really needs to enhance and strengthen the existing initiatives that already exist and not compete with them. So obviously worker hotlines, grievance mechanisms, national databases, corporate-driven actions, data hubs, everything continues to matter. We need that data. The mesh is about creating connective tissue. And so we want to make sure that it's fully understood by everyone that there are different universes of data. And if we want to better understand essentially what's happening, we need all of them to be working together and to be able to connect to all of them. So we need everyone. Third, from the government ministries, there was a significant interest around what can they do with their siloed data sets. So in some cases, they do have databases that exist that they're launching. In many ways, they're innovations from the volumes of paper-based records that they're also holding as well. So there was an interest essentially in where can this mesh connect on some of their ongoing innovation issues and where they can bring that together. This came from, in January, we got a mandate from the Thai Ministry of Foreign Affairs to explore how the partnership can accelerate efforts around data collaboration with government stakeholders. And this is particularly in the case around scam centers and recruitment there and forced criminality, where there is a group of ministries that are essentially thinking about what can they do with their data and to bring that together. And the mesh could be a useful solution to bring that safely together with partners. And then maybe the last point is that the mesh is not just about collective intelligence, but also there's an opportunity for federated services, practical tools, and APIs that individual organizations can use on their own. So this was actually really interesting for folks on the ground to talk about the practical value of if you have an anonymization tool that's hosted on the mesh, can I use that to help out with my data, right? Do you have data quality tools that I can have quick access to? Maybe that's hosted by a corporate on the mesh that we can actually use, or AI-enabled applications or risk scoring models that I can bring into my work. So there's an opportunity for practical application as well. So looking forward for the rest of the year, the partnership will continue to develop the functionalities of the mesh and around the use case around recruitment, and then move into other use case areas, particularly around seafood, scam centers, and other areas. We have 12 organizations participating on the first pilot. And then by the end of the year, we're hoping to already expand that double fold through the other use cases. What we're hoping to have by the end of the year is some concrete insights that would not have existed on their own outside of the federation, right? To really prove that model, and then to already be moving on to the action side in terms of what does that mean with the stakeholders that are participating. Maybe I'll leave it there and then we can keep going.
Thanks, David. And it sounds very promising. So I'll turn to Anna, and I would love for you to play a little bit of devil's advocate as well, to talk about what the data can or cannot achieve, right? I think we also need to be realistic. I think the IOM report that you mentioned in the previous panel, and for those watching online, go back and watch it because it was a really interesting panel. I think IOM did a really good job in also acknowledging what hasn't worked and the limitations of the work we've been all undertaking for the last 10 years. So can you talk a little bit about the value and the importance of cross-border data, but also the limitations of what the data mesh and the data can achieve?
Yes, thank you. Yes, that's exactly sort of trying to tackle that challenge, right? Of what are these commitments that we've made, as we've talked about this morning, and what's actually happening. And I think IOM, as a founding member of the Global Data Partnership Against Forced Labor, we're really supportive of this idea that all of these data sources are quite siloed. And again, all of the efforts that have happened over the past 10 years have been, separate in some of the ways that they've made progress. But what if we could bring some of that information together and provide a more accurate picture? IOM, again, as you'll hear later on today, we have a lot of data. There are migrant resource centers. There's a displacement tracking matrix. There's a counter trafficking data collaborative. There's a lot of multiple sources where we are, and there's case management where IOM is dealing with individual migrants and understanding their situation and providing support. What if we could bring those insights to decision makers in a more accessible way? And in the same way that a worker voice app, someone who's in contact regularly with workers organizations on the ground, and audits and government data, what if we could paint a more accurate sort of pixelated picture of what's happening and make that data actionable? We are making assumptions, and there's a lot of work going on in the partnership as to how to make sure that data has high quality. There is governance around it. There are data protections in place. And again, IOM is playing a role in that to make sure that there are standards that we're adhering to, so that eventually we're going to be a data sort of collaborator, what's the word, contributor, as well as user, but so that the users of the data, it's not just extractive, but we know that that comes from a reliable place. There have been data standards applied, data quality protections for workers and individuals, but we can get information that will actually produce decisions or inform decisions, data-driven decisions, which many companies and governments, that's the foundation that we want to use, right? So the underlying sort of theory of change here is that if more information about the reality of forced labor is made available to decision makers, they will make decisions to act, to address and prevent it. It's a very important assumption, but we have to recognize that that is part of the issue, that when people don't take preventative or responsive action to forced labor, it is because of a lack of visibility as one of the issues. Data is not going to solve everything, as you said, Julia. There are limitations, but this is one of the measures and one of the sort of, in terms of our next decade, one of the key parts that needs to be in place is a greater visibility, and this partnership can contribute to that. So I hope that answers the question.
Thanks, Anna. And I'm so happy to see our online speakers with us. Hopefully we can see them on the big screen as well. So Mallika, I'll turn to you. You're speaking from Thailand. You represent civil society. You lead on partnerships at Freedom Collective. And I would love to hear from you from a civil society perspective. How do you see the data being collected to date contributing to the initiative and to the data match? And what do you think is needed next in this phase of testing the recruitment case?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Julia, and good afternoon from Bangkok. It's a pleasure to be joining you virtually here. At Freedom Collaborative, we work closely with civil society organizations across Thailand and also the wider region respond to forced labor and also human trafficking every day. So we've seen that through case management, worker interviews, hotlines, legal support, and frontline outreach, there are organizations already collecting a wealth of information, looking at recruitment pathways and labor brokers, to even issues such as recruitment fees, migration routes, worker grievances, and even referral outcomes. So the question is, from a civil society perspective, it isn't really whether the data exists. It already does. The challenge is that these data remain really fragmented across organizations. They're usually very highly sensitive and are held by frontline teams working with very limited capacity. So the opportunity, I think, here is finding a way to connect those insights responsibilities so the data that is being kindly collected can better protect workers in the long term. It's also important, I think, to kind of play a little bit on the devil's advocate role as well, is to recognize why organizations as well can be maybe a bit hesitant to participate, even if they fully support and genuinely support the overall vision of the Global Data Partnership. So from a civil society perspective, the reality is many organizations already are pretty stretched thin. Following the dramatic shift in the funding landscape that we see, particularly after the fallout from USAID, many organizations, civil society actors are trying to do more with fewer resources while continuing to support survivors, accompany victims through lengthy legal processes, and maintain critical frontline services. So speaking personally, before I joined Freedom Collaborative, I spent more than a decade working in the front line with survivors of trafficking. I know what it feels like when your priority is helping the people sitting in front of you. When another request comes in asking you to collect more data, complete another reporting template, or even participate in another initiative. We understand why data matters, but from the front line, it can feel like another demand on already limited capacity. And I think there's also understandably caution around sharing data too. It's not even just about privacy. Organizations really do worry about how this information will be interpreted and whether it might be used to judge gaps in system that is already under enormous strain. That's why civil society doesn't just contribute data, in my opinion. I think they provide critical and important context. It understands why workers make certain recruitment decisions as they come into the pipeline, what vulnerabilities they're also navigating, and also more importantly, I think showing where existing protection systems are succeeding or maybe failing to succeed here. That being said, I'm still very much incredibly excited about the Global Data Partnership. It's aiming to do things that we have not even thought of ourselves, using a federated data system. So that way, everyone can feel a sense of ownership and also data sovereignty over everything that they have. So in terms of the recruitment use case, my hope for it is that it is not just simply using it to also obviously connect more data sets and the work that we do. It's also to hopefully demonstrate the value back to the organizations and also workers who make this data even possible to begin with. Civil society shouldn't feel like they're contributing data into what we call like a black box. They should be able to see how information is being used, what insights have already emerged, and also how these insights really lead to stronger protection, early identification of recruitment risks, better referrals, and also making more informed decisions across government, business, and also civil society. With real incentive and also ensuring that the data ownership is entirely theirs, there is less fear and willingness for civil society actors to be engaged and involved. So ultimately, participation isn't, it has to be a genuine partnership. Long-term engagement will simply come because organizations trust the technology, trust the process. It will come because they see practical value returning to their own work. So data should never feel like another burden of their job. It should feel like a part of a solution where it helps organizations prevent exploitation and also reduce the number of people needing services in the first place. Looking ahead, recruitment is only, I think, just the beginning. I think once we demonstrate trust and also value through the first use case, I see enormous potential to expand into areas for future use case. So, for example, looking at expanding and even shedding new light on issues such as informal labor brokers, worker grievances mechanism, even look at cross-border referrals, and even newer trends that I think we mentioned previously, such as trafficking for forced criminality and even cyber scam center recruitment. Having served at the Thailand-Myanmar border over the past year, conducting victim identification of victims and also individual exiting those cyber scam center, I see a strong coordinated responses by civil society organizations, but also very real gaps and I think inconsistent coordination efforts by different actors. For a future use case in this particular area, it will help us to counteract the fact that no single organization sees the full picture, but where we combine civil society insights and also insights from different actors such as the government, we can help to identify patterns earlier, strengthen coordination, and also ultimately prevent exploitation before it occurs. So at Freedom Collaborative, we often say that collaboration is one of our greatest strengths in addressing human trafficking and forced labor. If this partnership can genuinely support civil society, government, and also businesses alike, while also respecting that organization contributing the data, demonstrating practical value, then data becomes so much more than just information. It can become a real tool for prevention. And I think ultimately that's just what we're trying to achieve, not just simply understanding exploitation a little bit better, but also preventing it from happening in the first place. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mallika. And you touched on a point just now, which is identification of victims. And I just want to say that I know one of the premises or the principles of the Global Data Partnership is that everyone is basing their assessments on the ILO indicators and on common indicators of forced labor. And that's a huge challenge, right? Because different organizations, and we're only talking about one country, Thailand, but when you extrapolate that globally, every enforcement agency, every actor in this ecosystem might be looking at the issue from a different perspective and interpreting it in a different way. And then the data you're collecting is also not standardized. So I think that's a really important point. And also, Mallika, I think to your point about civil society being already stretched, I also want to make the point about business participation, right? And I think civil society is really great to see civil society engaged and willing to share data and wanting to see the value. I know later we have a session also talking about the business angle and the importance of business engagement. And I just want to reinforce that because really business are a big player and need to be contributing data. We know that business will have information about these issues if they are doing their reporting and their due diligence properly. So business have a key role to play. But I'll now turn to you, Hannah. And Diginex has been working at the intersection of technology, data, and responsible business conduct for quite some time. So you have quite an interesting perspective on what works, what doesn't work. So I'd love to hear from you what you would like to see next for the partnership and what you see also as the sort of technical limitations and the potential. So over to you.
Sure, thanks. So just a little introduction in case people don't know who Diginex are. We help organizations move from data to action, combining technology, analytics, and expertise to manage risk, improve performance, and deliver measurable impacts. I'm the Director of Supply Chain Technology, Research and Development, so I oversee a couple of our platforms, including Apprise, our worker voice tool that's been used to interview almost 650,000 workers in vulnerable situations. We have Lumen, our supply chain due diligence tool that supports supply chain visibility and then integrates that worker voice from Apprise with perspectives of suppliers, labor providers, and recruiters. And Trace, which was a US Department of Labor, ILAB, International Labor Affairs Bureau funded product traceability tool that we developed to trace products from raw material to final product assembly, overlaying those risk signals to identify the risk of child labor and forced labor with an individual product. So when we reflect back on that premise of the use case one, we know there that there's no single contributor's data alone that produces this defensible signal, but it's that combination that gives us the benefits. We have at Diginex been looking with that same conviction. In our case, there's no single party in a supply chain that provides the whole picture of practices in a workplace. Our assessments, whether that's on the product traceability tool or Lumen, they only really become actionable when we triangulate the worker voice data and we triangulate the remediation outcomes. Those remediation outcomes themselves, we verify again through worker voice data. So my comments today, when I speak about this, is really from the experience of running that pipeline in the field. A big caveat to remember here is that when I speak from Diginex perspective, it's where we've defined the data standards ourselves. We know there's the same process, the same definitions across all of the data we collected because we designed it that way. When we're looking at this data mesh, that is one of the big technical challenges that we'll be the first to overcome. What does risk look like? Is this risk to workers? Is this risk to businesses? Even the internal representation of that risk itself. So with this in mind, let's turn to signal saliency. What do we even mean by that? So for us, a signal is salient if it's going to be able to bring meaningful change to what you're trying to do. in the case of use case 1, a signal is salient if it actually helps you separate those ethical recruitment agencies from exploitative ones, if it tracks worker outcomes rather than just compliance documentation. If we're federating data across this mesh, this test isn't just visibility, it's whether what we see leads to something someone does differently tomorrow. On signal saliency, I thought I'd make a couple of points from what we've seen ourselves. So the first one, worker reports, and in this case, worker reported fees are the anchor signal, and federation is what converts this complaint into evidence. So for example, from a prize, we know that workers will tell you things that audits simply can't surface about fee payments, contract substitution, deception in recruitment offers. But a single worker report is just a data point. For us, it's a signal that we use to indicate a branch should dig deeper. If other sources also uncover similar findings, then it provides more evidence of the signal. The saliency multiplier comes from this corroboration. When the same fee pattern appears across different sources, the mesh can then highlight the finding. An interesting point, as well as convergence, is divergence. So source divergence in itself is the most diagnostic signal, and we see this every day. We often get asked from our clients what to do when sources contradict each other. For example, maybe a supplier assessment or audit comes back clean, but workers flag issues. This is the most common divergence, and it doesn't mean the audit's wrong, it doesn't mean the workers are lying, or it doesn't mean the tools don't work. It could mean that the assessment captured a managed presentation. It could mean that workers honestly reported their experiences. We know that practices of exploitation change. Workers could have come through different recruitment experiences, through different corridors, and at different points in time. We've had cases where brands have done in-person investigations to follow up on signals from workers, and they also haven't identified the exploitation that was reported. Does that mean it didn't happen? It's a point to actually reflect. It's a point to consider the power imbalances, for example, when an investigation happens. What structures are trusted by workers? What structures were used to do those investigations? Were workers in a space where they felt safe enough to disclose? And this really points to the inclusion of unions and other NGOs, for example, where workers actually feel safe to be able to raise those grievances. All of these different signals need to be able to be fed into that data mesh to help us to understand what is really happening. So in our tool Lumen, for example, we highlight these source divergences. They're highlighted as a place to dig a little deeper. With this in mind, that federated data mesh should model divergence as well as convergence, not just treating that divergence as noise to be resolved. My last point from our findings is that really saliency is corridor specific. This is something also reflected in IOM's report, but from our analysis of APRI's reports, we see that practices of exploitation differ over recruitment corridor, over sector, and over time. So the signal saliency is also going to depend on these corridors. It means that a worker-reported fee signal, for example, shouldn't be treated as globally salient. A report from one corridor, say Myanmar to Thailand, carries different informational weight than the same signal from Laos to Thailand. When we're looking at data meshes, we need to be able to weigh saliency by the governance context, by the sector, and the specific client-agency relationship. I think I'll hand it back to there so we can go for some questions.
Thank you so much, Hannah. I've been reflecting, and for those, I think Sarah mentioned it in the opening, but for those of you who don't know, I worked on forced labor and labor migration issues here in Southeast Asia for a long time, and before that at the ILO, and I'm reflecting on what Mallika and Hannah have been saying, and how much of the burden of proof is on workers, right? And the weight that we place on that evidence that is generated by workers who are the victims, and what this means when we know that companies have a duty to do their due diligence and to identify their risks and to know what's happening in their supply chains, and when governments have also a responsibility to do to do law enforcement properly, to do labor inspections properly, and to be identifying those issues without just having to rely on workers' account. So that's just a reflection. But building on that, I would love to ask all of you actually, and especially you, David, you've just come back from Thailand, and we are here saying, well, if all the actors, so say companies, suppliers, governments, recruiters, have access to that data, they will then be able to act. They might not act all at the same speed. They might not act collaboratively. So where do each of you see the bottlenecks? Who's going to move faster? Who's likely to take the longest? And maybe this is for you, Anna, in particular, what can some of us here in this room also do to continue pushing those actors to move at the speed that is needed? So I'll start with you, David.
Great. No, thank you for that. And thank you to all of the speakers and colleagues. Maybe I'll start with just my frame on that. We need everyone to move. And people are moving based on the sort of their own environments and pressures that they're existing on their own, right? And so we need business to move. There's also the current regulatory environments which are pushing them to move more and more, right? And we see that in Davos, and we've had those discussions where businesses are more interested and need to be more interested in what's happening in their supply chains. So we'll need business to move. We need government to move as well, to really create that space to actually move on these insights and properly deal with the issue. So in my view, we need all the stakeholders to move. What we're doing as part of the partnership by design, and especially in these use cases that have been mentioned, we know that we need the diversity of stakeholders to move together on some of these issues. And so what would it look like for a group of civil society, business stakeholders, government stakeholders, as we're making sense of this data together, to also be thinking about what does action accountability now look like in Thailand together around recruitment. If we're seeing these certain signals around different agencies, there are different decisions that each of us now need to make at the table, right? And how can we think about that properly as a use case? So for us as a partnership, the use case is not just only what individuals can do on their own, although rightfully so, and we're creating tools for people to do that work on their own, for their own work, but then also what you can then contribute collectively on the work that we're doing in Thailand. And I should say we've started in Thailand being the first use case, but then hoping to go to other countries. So in many ways, it's both.
Thanks, David. Mallika, I'll continue in Thailand with you. So can you build on that and reflect? Who's going to move first? How do we make everyone move together?
Absolutely. I think there's a very real fear at times when it comes to the word data sharing, or even working collaboratively to move things forward. Usually when it comes to the fear, it's usually there's two different factors that is compounding that fear or that anxiety to kind of like move forward or even to act upon the data that they're seeing. In a way, working collectively and also advocating closely with government and also civil society. I think a lot of times we have to present this data or this partnership in a way that this is here to help you do your work more effectively. It's not to point out flaws. It's not to just like point out gaps, which obviously this data will very much do so. But we're trying to formulate it in a way that is positive. It's meant to help you, advocate for, the things that needs to be done in terms of like responding to various different issues, including forced labor, trafficking, and even forced criminality in Thailand. Government do not want to make me feel like they're just kind of like failing or not doing things, especially when you're presenting data in front of them. And especially when it comes to civil society too, there's a very real sense of anxiety and a real sense of the fact that like the data or even joining on a data partnership might point out to the flaws, and also the fact that they have not done enough or also have done collective action on this particular point. But by ensuring that we're here to kind of like do this collaboratively, it's not meant to take away their data sovereignty, and also the fact that we're here to really just kind of like advocate on this particular topic together. It will help just ensure that all of these different actors, businesses even, kind of like move forward together on the same kind of like spectrum.
Thank you. Hannah, I'll go to you next. Sort of, you have the global level experience as well. So what do you make of what David and Mallika shared?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really great. I think I used to be an academic, so putting my academic hat back on, we talk about technology often being seen as this silver bullet, that it's going to come and it's going to solve all of our problems. But we know actually that the problems we're trying to solve here are messy problems. They're really complex. They depend on context. Things don't work everywhere. And a long time ago, I wrote a couple of papers on this, saying that technology is not a silver bullet. It's not going to solve these problems. What it's going to do is actually amplify the original intent of the participants here. So what we're looking for here is trying to make sure that the original intent is shaped towards the same direction. It's the understanding the motivations for participation, the incentives for participation, because then you get people moving in the same direction to begin with, like all the stuff David's already doing in Thailand. You know, that is more important to begin with, because you need to make sure you're all moving in the same direction, and then you'll get the change afterwards.
Yeah, and I think incentives and disincentives is something IHRB always mentions as well, right? What are also the disincentives not to act? So how can we make that very clear? And I'll come to you in a second, but I just saw that we have lots of questions. So let's see what people are asking. Carmen, do you want to bring the questions?
Yes, so as Julia mentioned, there are a lot of questions in the chat. I tried to group some of them that touch on the same topics. So let's start with the first one. This one is a very interesting one. As recruitment increasingly moves online, how will the partnership monitor AI-powered recruitment platforms, digital labor marketplaces, and AI-driven intermediaries that may facilitate worker exploitation? That's the first one. The second, will recruitment agencies have the right to review, challenge, or correct data relating to their organizations before it is used for compliance assessments or public reporting? What can you share about these sort of mechanisms? What has the partnership thought about this? And then it's another one that I grouped that reads, has the partnership any plans to collect data on employers that violate the employer-based principles or responsible recruitment practices? And what are you planning to do with those findings? Which, I mean, it's lies to another question that reads, how will the data be translated to action, specifically when it comes to proving redress for migrants who face human rights violations? And then again, I'll stay here if you want me to reread that question or ask another one.
Thank you, Carmen. Anna, I'll start to you. You can pick and choose. There's a lot.
Thank you. In terms of online AI intermediaries, Hannah might be placed better than I to answer that one. Will recruitment agencies be able to challenge and review the findings? I think the whole idea is that there is a lot of triangulation happening, and we won't rely, the mesh won't rely on one data source, but it will be triangulating multiple data sources. And so hopefully that should present an accurate picture of the reality, but I would imagine that recruiters could also be data contributors, which David can answer that question. In terms of how it will translate to sort of redress and monitoring remedy, I think that's TBD. These are things that we want to do. We want to be able to measure the resulting action, but there's a lot of work and focus concentration right now on actually getting the data mesh to work. I think the accountability piece is going to be a part of it, but we're tackling it in phases.
Thank you. David?
I think very well said. But just a couple of comments just around, it's true that we are tackling the technical piece and trying to get that off the ground. We're tackling the governance pieces, as I mentioned, not just safeguarding the data and the work, but then also making sure that the group of people we're bringing together are not groups of data. They're groups of folks that are going to take action and work with us in Thailand. And so really making it practical around actionability, which could include a number of different folks in conversation, including recruitment agencies and other folks, to make sense of what's happening in addition to what we're seeing on the mesh. So that's the question on the recruitment agencies being a part of it. I think there's more that we will do in designing around the accountability piece and trying to think through that. And that's going to be different in every place that this will function. A big part of our work in the trip recently was to really better understand the current networks in Thailand, to understand how this is going to be serving and helpful to them in the ongoing efforts. And so I'll say +1 to everything Mallika said, and thanks for the conversation that we had yesterday in Thailand.
Thanks, David. Hannah, do you want to come in on AI-powered recruitment? And it's really good to see so many questions being asked about it, because tomorrow we're going to have a workshop about that. And I think it's going to be a really interesting exercise for those of us here in the room. So, Hannah, over to you.
Sure. Cool. So I guess the same conditions that make digital recruitment efficient also make it really exploitable. It's low cost to list there. There's no verification. You can reach across borders. You can easily take down and relaunch overnight. All of these things mean it's easy to use it to exploit others. Off the top of my head, the first thing I would do is change or add more kinds of questions, like recruitment channel specific questions, so we can start gathering information about the recruitment agencies, that online ones as well. So for example, when you have a worker voice survey, you can easily ask about how people were recruited, and getting more nuance into that part. They're the same kinds of questions that you could ask about recruitment journeys for in-person recruitment, but extending the types of answers there to include online, if you met people in person at all, you know.
Thanks, Hannah. Carmen, I think we're at time. Do you have one burning question, if it's very short?
I do have one, which I don't think it will be of surprise to any of you, and it's about data protection. How are you working with regulations or regulation representatives to ensure privacy is protected?
David.
Yes, I mean, yes, we are. And we're obviously not just only building on all the different principles and work that's already been discussed now, but we are working closely with them to make sure that the mesh will protect all of that. And that was a key conversation with government ministries as they're thinking about getting on board to the mesh.
Thank you. Thanks, Carmen. Look, we're at time and we need to break for lunch now, because we only have an hour and then our online audience is going to come back. But I would encourage the conversation to continue at lunch. And I think there is a lot also to be said about what we can expect if we're here at the end of 2027 or early 2028. Where are we? What does success look like? So hopefully we can have that conversation over lunch. And we look forward to continue to engage in the partnership and to, I think, bring collaboration and collective action. I think we all agree that we need to move together and push the incentives and disincentives for people to act on the data. So thank you very much. Lunch will be served downstairs on the first floor. So you just take the escalator. And for people online, we'll be back in 1 hour and we'll be on time. So also take a break and we look forward to seeing you in 1 hour. Thank you.